The winter's gift. The snow fell in thick, silent curtains across the city that December evening. Each flake drifted lazily past the towering glass windows of the corporate headquarters, casting dancing shadows in the warm light that spilled from within. On the 42nd floor, Margaret Chen sat alone in her executive office, the weight of another long day pressing heavily on her shoulders. Margaret had built her technology empire from nothing. 20 years of 16-hour days, countless sacrifices, and unwavering determination had transformed her small startup into one of the most successful companies in the country. But success, she had learned, could be a lonely companion. The mahogany desk before her was polished to perfection, surrounded by awards and accolades that seemed to glitter coldly in the lamplight. Outside, the wind howled against the windows with increasing fury. Margaret glanced at her watch. Nearly 9 o'clock. The building had emptied hours ago, leaving only the security guards and the steady hum of the heating system to keep her company. She should go home, she knew. But home was just another empty space, larger and more luxurious than this office, yet somehow even more hollow. The intercom on her desk crackled to life, startling her from her thoughts. "Ms. Chen," came the voice of Robert, the night security guard. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's someone at the main entrance. A young girl. She's asking to see you specifically." Margaret frowned, setting down her pen. "At this hour? In this weather?" "Yes, ma'am. She says her name is Emma Rodriguez. She looks pretty cold, Ms. Chen. Should I send her away?" Something in Robert's voice made Margaret pause. She had built her reputation on being tough, on making difficult decisions without hesitation. But there was something about a child being out in this storm that stirred something deep within her chest. "No," she heard herself saying. "Have her come up." Margaret stood and smoothed her charcoal suit, uncertain why her hands were suddenly trembling. She moved to the window and watched the snow swirl in the amber glow of the street lights below. What kind of child would be out on a night like this? What kind of desperation would drive someone so young to seek out a complete stranger? The elevator chimed softly in the hallway, followed by the gentle sound of footsteps on marble. Margaret turned as Robert appeared in her doorway, his weathered face creased with concern. Behind him stood a girl who couldn't have been more than 12 years old. Emma Rodriguez was small for her age, with dark hair that hung in damp strands around her thin shoulders. Her coat, if the threadbare jacket could be called that, was soaked through, and her worn sneakers left small puddles on the pristine floor. But it was her eyes that struck Margaret most powerfully. They were large and brown, filled with a mixture of hope and fear that made Margaret's chest tighten. "I'm so cold," Emma whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind outside. Her small body shivered visibly as she looked up at Margaret with those impossibly expressive eyes. "May I come in, please?" Margaret felt something crack inside her chest, like ice breaking on a frozen lake. Without a word, she stepped forward and gently guided Emma into the warm office. Robert nodded and quietly withdrew, closing the door behind him with a soft click. "Sit here," Margaret said softly, leading Emma to the leather armchair near the fireplace that she rarely used. She grabbed her own cashmere coat from the closet and wrapped it around the girl's trembling shoulders. "You're safe now." Emma's teeth chattered as she pulled the coat tight around herself. "Thank you," she managed. "I didn't know where else to go." Margaret knelt beside the chair, her expensive heels forgotten. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Emma Rodriguez," the girl replied, her voice growing steadier in the warmth. "I live at St. Mary's Children's Home." I did. What happened?" Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she held them back with the kind of strength that shouldn't exist in someone so young. "They're closing it down tomorrow. All the funding got cut, and they can't keep us anymore. Most of the other kids got placed with families or moved to other homes, but not you." Emma shook her head, a single tear escaping despite her efforts. "I'm too old, they say. And I have some difficulties. Learning things is harder for me than other kids. Nobody wants a 12-year-old who needs extra help." Margaret felt her heart breaking in ways she didn't know were possible. She thought of her own childhood, of parents who had worked 3 jobs each to give her every opportunity. She thought of all the advantages she had taken for granted, all the doors that had been opened for her simply because she had people who believed in her worth. "Where were you planning to go tonight?" Margaret asked gently. Emma's shoulders sagged. I don't know. I heard some of the other kids talking about you once. They said you grew up poor too, but you became successful. I thought, maybe you might understand. Maybe you might know what I should do. The words hit Margaret like a physical blow. This child had walked through a snowstorm, climbed 42 flights when the elevator required a key card, and somehow convinced security to let her stay, all on the slim hope that a stranger might show her kindness. Margaret stood slowly, her mind racing. She looked around her office, at the awards, the expensive furniture, the view that cost more per month than most people made in a year. For the first time, she saw it all clearly. This wasn't success. This was just emptiness wrapped in expensive packaging. Emma, she said quietly, what if I told you that you didn't have to figure this out alone? The girl looked up with cautious hope. What do you mean? Margaret took a deep breath, knowing that her next words would change everything. I mean, what if you came home with me tonight? And tomorrow, we start figuring out a real solution. Together. Emma's eyes went wide. But you don't even know me. No, Margaret admitted, but I know what it feels like to be alone. And I know what it means when someone gives you a chance. She paused, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Besides, I think you might be exactly what I've been missing. For the first time since entering the office, Emma smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it lit up her entire face. Really? Margaret nodded, feeling something warm unfold in her chest, something that had been frozen for far too long. Really? But first, let's get you some hot chocolate and dry clothes. We can figure out the rest as we go. As they prepared to leave the office together, Margaret glanced back at her desk, at all the symbols of her solitary success. Tomorrow, she would make some calls. She would use her resources, her connections, her influence. But tonight, she had received the greatest gift of all, the chance to matter to someone who needed her. The snow was still falling as they stepped into the elevator, but somehow, the world felt infinitely warmer. Word count. 1247 *.